solve the equation. So again, what we see in terms of our answers there are the 37/5 or negative 37/5 and 1 and negative 1. But I want to take a look over here at this problem, and as we look at it, we need to find the least common denominator. And what we have is we have an n squared, we have a 6, and we have 6n squared. So notice, if we take n squared and we multiply it by 6, because these are both different, n squared times 6 is 6n squared, and that's going to be our common denominator that we are going to use to multiply every term in this equation. So we're going to take 6n squared and we're going to multiply it by this fraction. We're going to take 6n squared and multiply it by 1/6. And we're going to take 6n squared and we're going to multiply it by our last fraction in this equation. And finding the common denominator allows us to cancel out the fraction. For instance, the n squareds cancel out in this, and we're left with 6 times n squared plus 7n plus 6. In our next fraction, there's a 6 here and there's a 6 there, and we're left with then n squared times 1. And I hope you don't have to write that, but I don't want to skip a step. And then in our last fraction, 6n squared, we do need to write that one here. So now we're going to distribute. And we get 6n squared plus 42n plus 36 equals n squared minus 1. And let's put everything on the same side of the equal sign. So let's subtract n squared from both sides. And we get 5n squared plus 42n plus 36 equals negative 1. Let's add 1 to both sides. And we get 5n squared plus 42n plus 37 equals 0. Got to be able to see it. So now it should be interesting because we need a factor. It is a split the middle problem, and I should say I hope that it factors. Starting by multiplying 5 times 37 gives us 185, and as we take a look at this, we get 1 and 185. 2 doesn't go in there. 185 divided by 3, nope. 185 divided by 4, pretty sure no. 185 divided by 5, yes, 5 and 37. And actually, that works out here because 5 and 37 does add to be 42. Got lucky on that, to be perfectly honest. Everything is positive in here, so we are adding these two values together. So this is 5n squared plus 5n plus 37n plus 37. And I grouped them nicely with the 5's together and the 37's together. And our greatest common factor in the first is 5n. And when we factor that out, we're left with n plus 1, and you do need to write the 1. 5n divided by 5n is 1. Biggest number that divides into both is the 37, and when we factor that out, again we need that n plus 1, because that's what's the same in both groups, and then we've got the 5n plus 37. Well, now we're going to take those values and we're going to set each of them equal to 0. So n plus 1 equals 0. We can subtract 1 from both sides, so we get n equals negative 1. And then over here, 5n plus 37 equals 0. if we subtract 37 from both sides, we get 5n equals negative 37. And divide both sides by 5, so n equals negative 37 fifths. Got to be able to see it. So as I pause here for a second to look back over at Edmentum, in fact I'll pull this here, at least this third option here could be a good option, but we need to go back and check and make sure that neither one of those values is going to cause us to have 0 in the denominator. And I wrote negative 1 first, and when we put negative 1 back in here, we're going to get 1. When we put negative 1 back in here, we're going to get 6, no zeros. So definitely negative 1 is an answer. Now, I don't know what negative 37 fifths is, but I know when I square it, it's not going to be 0. And over here, 6 times 37 fifths squared, again, I know is not going to be 0. So our answers to this problem are what we got, which is the negative 37 fifths and the negative 1.